Hey everybody, it's me, Green Films Official, your favorite chronic film viewer and reviewer. Today, I want to talk about one of my favorite directors ever, a man named King Hu. And despite how great he is, I'm willing to bet that you've never even heard of him before. King Hu is known primarily for his wuxia genre films, which raised the cinema of Hong Kong and Taiwan to new heights, both technical and artistic. If you don't know what the wuxia genre is, it's basically a genre of Chinese fiction centered around tales of martial artists and their adventures in ancient China. However, Hu had to come a long way before his wuxia successes. In 1932, King Hu was born in Beijing to a well-established family. Later, in the late 40s, he emigrated to Hong Kong with plans to study in the United States, but he wasn't able to make enough money for tuition. He worked in the local Voice of America in Hong Kong, as well as a variety of other occupations, in addition to a few artistic and producer efforts for several different media companies. In the late 50s, he ended up joining the Shaw Brothers studio, helping to decorate sets, act, and even write scripts and serve as an assistant director for some projects. And later on, under the influence of Taiwanese director Li Han-hisheng, Hu began working towards a full-on directorial career, helping Lee create a wildly successful film called The Love Eterne. Hu's first directorial works ended up being a romantic drama film known as The Story of Susan and a war film entitled Sons of the Good Earth. However, he would not see true success until he directed the wuxia film Come Drink With Me, which has since become a classic of the genre. After leaving the Shaw Brothers in the late 60s, he moved to Taiwan and went on to direct another wuxia classic, Dragon Inn, which annihilated box office records at the time, and, well, the rest is history. I find King Hu and his body of work to be absolutely fascinating because his films are pretty much blockbusters in Taiwan, and he's influenced some of the world's most famous directors, such as Ang Lee and even Edgar Goddamn Wright, and yet hardly anyone outside of Taiwan seems to know he even exists. And that's a damn shame, because man made some really good movies. And with this video, I hope to bring more attention to King Hu and his body of work. And even if I just create one new King Hu fan with this video, well then, I'll have considered this video a success. So, without further ado, let's discuss some truly breathtaking cinema. As I mentioned before, Dragon Inn is kind of a big deal. In fact, it's probably the biggest financial success of King Hu's entire career. In 1968, it was the second highest grossing film in Hong Kong. Also in 1968, it won the award for Best Screenplay at the Golden Horse Awards, which if you don't know what those are, it's basically the Oscars for Taiwan. Hu himself was also a runner-up for Best Director. It received two remakes, one called New Dragon Gate Inn, and the other called Flying Swords of Dragon Gate. It's the film that many people are introduced to King Hu with, and for good reason. Even though I'd argue that A Touch of Zen is also a good place to start, Dragon Inn is where he began to master his craft. It also is a lot shorter and has a much simpler story than A Touch of Zen, so that makes it an ideal place to begin. The film is set in the middle of the Ming Dynasty and tells the tale of a dastardly eunuch named Cao, who has murdered the loyal minister, Yu, and his children, who are banished to the border. Cao proceeds to undergo efforts to hunt down and massacre Yu's remaining family, and so the children take refuge in the Dragon Gate Inn. In order to keep the children safe, a noble swordsman named Xiao and Yu's surviving loyalists fiercely battle against Cao's deadly forces as they close in on the inn. To me at least, King Hu's films tend to feel like westerns, but with martial artists and swordspeople instead of cowboys and gunslingers, due to their general filmmaking style, but Dragon Inn is where I find this feeling is most apparent. There's something about the desert setting, wisecracking characters that banter with each other, the fast pace, suspense, and the standoffs between the heroes and the villains that really make it feel like a classic western. Also, the editing adds a lot of personality to it, which is, a lot of good westerns do that as well. There are a few little editing things in here that feel like they came out of The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. It's very exciting to watch throughout because the bad guys are always trying to dispose of our heroes in some way, whether it be through poison in their drinks or henchmen sent to kill them in their sleep. And that's just in the first half. It's quite an on-edge viewing experience, honestly. However, I don't think the film would be nearly as suspenseful if the characters sucked. Thankfully, they don't suck. In fact, they're pretty great, and I'd like to talk about a couple of them. Zhao is probably Hu's best character. He encapsulates everything I would want in a protagonist of a wuxia film. He has a great introduction, he's charming, funny, and entertaining, and always thinking positively even when he's staring adversity in the face or on the brink of death. He is a skillful fighter and a total badass, but not to the point that he's unkillable. There's a point in the final fight where, despite him keeping his cool demeanor, you can sort of tell he's fearing for his life, and I love stuff like that. It allows him to be a cool character while still feeling like a real human being and not like some cartoony caricature. Something King Hu is notable for is his depiction of women as strong and capable, perhaps even more so than the men, and the prime example of this in Dragon Inn is Miss Chu Hui. Despite arguing with her brother a fair amount, the film makes it clear that she cares a lot for him, and it's implied at points that she might actually be the only reason he's even alive. Also, she has some of the coolest moments in the entire film. There's a scene where she's slowly walking towards the inn while it's guarded by archers, and she's a total badass in it. At the end, she's attacked by all of them. Like, they run out of arrows and charge at her with swords, and she manages to get past them all and get her way out of the situation, and it's simply fun to watch, man. Also, she's in the film a lot, which I like. Seeing her fight side by side with Zhao is great stuff. Hey, speaking of which, the action scenes are fantastic. They have this delicate blend of composure and yet brutality at the same time. And while Dragon Inn is not exactly a gory film, it's a lot bloodier than a lot of King Hu's other films, which helps certain moments have impact. The film's climax is simply awesome. Like, the build up to it is amazing, and the heroes fighting their way up this hill, fighting for their lives, is really entertaining and exciting stuff. There were points in which I genuinely didn't know if our heroes were going to make it, which is a rarity for action films, honestly. The final battle is like 4 or 5 dudes versus the villain, and the villain is on top for most of it, which is fantastic. Suspense, tension. Overall, Dragon Inn is simply a blast, and it's recognized as a classic of the wuxia genre for good reason. It has everything you'd want from a movie like this. Also, it's King Hu's most accessible film, making it not only a great introduction to his body of work, but also a great introduction to the wuxia genre. So yeah, Dragon Inn is pretty awesome. Check it out. Despite its initial financial failure, A Touch of Zen is King Hu's most popular film, and for damn good reason. I'd say it's probably his best. It's the film I think of first when I think King Hu. It embodies pretty much everything about what made the man such a talent behind the camera. The film centers around 2 characters, Gu and Yang. Gu is an unambitious painter who lives with his mother in a house near an abandoned mansion. This mansion is rumored to be haunted, but in reality, it's being used as a hiding spot for a warrior named Yang and her mother following the assassination of their loyal minister father by an evil eunuch named Wei. Wei sends an army after them, and it's up to the group to fight back against his evil warriors. It does have a very similar premise to Dragon Inn, but it takes that premise and goes in a really interesting direction with it. For starters, the film is like 3 hours long, but quite a lot happens, which not only helps with the pacing, but honestly makes it feel like a few different movies in one at points. During the first half an hour in which Gu believes the mansion to be haunted, it almost feels like a horror film. But then we meet Yang and the film shifts gears and becomes focused on the struggle she has faced and what has brought her to this point, before then shifting focus on the evil forces coming after her and how her, Gu and their allies try to fight back and deceive them. And there's even more that happens that I don't want to spoil for you. My point being here is that King Hu used his 3 hours really well, and I don't know what I would cut from this film if I were him. The characters are fun and likable, Gu and Yang easily being the standouts, which I'd say is probably a good thing since they're the main characters. Gu is played by Shi Chun, the same guy who plays Zhao in Dragon Inn, and despite playing a very different character here, he carries over the charm that made him so likable in that film, and he even undergoes a bit of a character arc. It may be a fairly basic one, but it's still nice to see his character go from a loafer to a combat strategist. Yang is fierce and courageous while still having her own sense of charm, and like Zhao, she manages to be a kick-ass fighter whilst also still being vulnerable, which I greatly appreciate. As I said when I was talking about Dragon Inn, it feels more realistic that way. I really don't like it in action movies when the protagonist is just a god amongst men, so it was nice to see this film not go down that route. Yang is played by Xu Feng, and as much as I love Xie Chun, she might actually be my favorite King Hu actor. She plays a wide range of different characters and plays them all so well. Yang is nothing like Melody from Legend of the Mountain, who is nothing like White Fox from Reigning in the Mountain. I think she's a pretty talented character actress, actually, and her and King Hu evidently worked well together. On top of having an exciting story and likable main characters, A Touch of Zen is where King Hu's visual style reaches its peak. The strong use of color, the sun shining through the trees, the flowing camera movement matching the characters, the wide shots of nature, the ferociously dramatic close-ups, the gorgeous backdrops, and the camera gliding through the trees. It's like visual poetry, and it just looks stellar. King Hu's understanding of the beauty of nature just really elevates his work. I also want to add that Chan Buddhism is a common theme in his work, and my favorite use of it is in this movie. It does a great job of adding a sense of mysticism and wonder to the film, and also, the monk's domain is a truly beautiful setting and feels incredibly peaceful, and the soundtrack whenever the Buddhists are around is also just a thing of beauty. It just has a relaxing yet awe-inspiring quality to it that I just can't put into words. And there's also a part later in the film where the abbot and the other monks glide towards the ground as the sun shines brightly and the wind blows through the trees, and it's simply majestic. Sorry for the watermark here, but this was the best quality footage of this scene I could find. Also, Abbot Hui is one of the best characters of the film. He has a real aura of power to him and gives off a vibe that he could totally kick your ass if he wanted to. But he tries to deal with every situation as peacefully as possible because, well, he's a Zen Buddhist. He avoids fighting and even tries to redeem one of the film's main antagonists towards the end. He's Zen almost to a fault. The action sequences are kinetic and riveting. They're beautifully shot and amazingly choreographed, and while lacking the outright brutality I loved so much about Dragon Inn's action sequences, they more than make up for it with how the characters move. They move really quickly, building a lot of urgency, yet they retain a sort of delicate control. It's hard to explain, but it's mesmerizing to watch. There's also a lot of leaping through the air, which is majestically shot. It's almost as if the characters are gliding at points. There are points where the action is cut rather quickly, but it's done in a way that adds excitement and feels stylish rather than annoying. For example, take notes, Hollywood. If you must have shots that are only 3 seconds long, not even like 1 second long in your action sequences, then do something like this. In addition to directing, Hu also edited a few of his films, and I think it's little moments like this that highlight his strengths in that department as well. I really love how this film ends. It's not necessarily a sad ending, but it's by no means a conventionally happy ending either. And yeah, I know bittersweet endings have been around since the dawn of cinema, but there's something about an action-adventure film like this with a bittersweet ending that just hits different, and it's one of many examples of how King Hu really innovated the wuxia genre. Overall, A Touch of Zen is just absolute magic. The characters are likable, the visuals are gorgeous, the fights are stunning, and it has a great mystical element to it. I consider it my favorite martial arts movie ever. Obviously, I recommend every movie I talk about in this video, but hypothetically, if you could only ever watch one King Hu film, I'd say this should be the one. Unlike the majority of King Hu's filmography of action-packed martial arts endeavors, Legend of the Mountain is a slow-paced horror fantasy mystery film. It tells the story of Ho, a scholar who is tasked to copy a Buddhist sutra, a powerful sutra that supposedly holds great dominion over the afterlife spirits. In order to conduct his work in peace, Ho travels to an isolated monastery in the mountains and encounters strange characters along the way. It doesn't take long before evil spirits try to steal the sutra for their own gain, and Ho is trapped in a spectral battle between forces of good and evil. While Legend of the Mountain is not an outright scary experience, it is very eerie in parts. The film often becomes a lot quieter for a minute after something creepy happens, creating quite an uncomfortable feeling, and I love stuff like that. Little things like that show that when it comes to horror, less is often more. Also, seeing how genuinely confused and creeped out Ho looks at points adds a lot to the eeriness and atmosphere of the film. Sometimes the film will just throw in something creepy during an otherwise normal or peaceful scene, and it's pretty jarring and makes you feel a little uneasy when it happens. This little clip I'm about to show you is one of my favorite examples of how the film does this.
我自个儿下来。我怕。
Interestingly, there are parts of the film that feel both a bit silly and creepy at the same time. There are a few examples I could give, but my favorite is a scene in which the main villain just freaking launches up in the air. Admittedly, it's pretty darn silly in concept, but surprisingly, it's actually a little spooky in execution. It just looks creepy, and it leaves a sinister feeling after it happens, because now the main villain could be anywhere, and you don't know when they're gonna show up next. The soundtrack is also super unsettling. Like the movie itself, it's not quite scary, but it's got a deeply unnerving quality to it, you know? Even though Ho is a pretty basic protagonist and his primary function, to me at least, is to serve as an avatar for the audience to experience the world of the movie through, I still really like him. Once again, he is played by Shi Chun, so he's got that charm to him. I also find that Shi Chun just has a very warm and friendly smile, which for me instantly increases the likability of any character he plays by about 25%. Look at this man, he's so happy. The titular mountain is an amazing setting, and it does a fantastic job at conveying the mystical and spectral mood the film is going for. And it's a very atmospheric film for this reason. And actually, the mountain brings me to another point, that the film is absolutely gorgeous to look at. Even if nothing super interesting is happening story-wise at points, the wondrous scenery surrounding our characters is enough to keep me engaged. I know I said A Touch of Zen is the height of King Hu's visual style, and in terms of cinematography and technique, I stand by that. But in terms of the actual environment our characters are in and the way King Hu frames it, this is his best looking film by far. And honestly, from visuals alone, I think this film stands tall and strong as a testament against the mindset some people have that horror is not or cannot be art. King Hu once said that the most difficult part about making this film was making the real seem unreal, but I think he did a really great job. Also, in terms of the actual sequence of events, this film takes what could have been a very typical and boring ghost story and spins it in a very interesting and fun direction. The way the film presents its narrative allows for a great sense of mystery, and at times it's hard to know who is and isn't an evil spirit. It also fully embraces its wonderfully strange and weird side and just goes completely bonkers with it in the last hour of the film, all without sacrificing the eeriness and atmosphere of its first 2 hours. So much bizarro shit happens in this part of the film, and I won't dare spoil any of it here. And for that reason, I don't want to say much more, because the less you know about this film going into it, the better. Legend of the Mountain is a delightfully weird, eerie, gorgeous, and captivating tour de force of strange and unsettling happenings depicted through the art of film. I love this movie. A Touch of Zen is a better film, but I personally get just as much enjoyment from this one. It's a film that's been permanently embedded into my mind, and I think about it a lot. It's by no means a film for everyone, and if it doesn't seem like your thing, I totally get it. The insane length may also put a few people off. However, if anything I've said about it in this video sounds even remotely interesting to you and you're willing to commit to it for 3 hours, then please give this strange little masterpiece a chance, because much like the rest of King Hu's filmography, it deserves more love. The last film I want to talk about is Raining in the Mountain, and despite its title and the fact that it came out the same year, it has nothing to do with Legend of the Mountain. It's a movie I find absolutely fascinating, actually, because it is simultaneously a heist thriller and a political drama set almost entirely within a Buddhist monastery. Like, you can't make that shit up. The plot is set in 16th century China and involves an aging abbot who, in the midst of his imminent retirement, invites 3 outsiders into his monastery so they can advise him on who should be his successor. These outsiders are Esquire Wen, a wealthy patron of the monastery, General Wang, commander-in-chief of the local military, and Wu Wai, a respected lay Buddhist master. Several of the monastery's disciples want the position of abbot and proceed to collude with both Esquire Wen and General Wang. However, both men have come with their own insurgent intent: to steal the priceless Mahayana Sutra hand-copied by Tripitaka before the other can. Surprisingly, for a martial arts film, it's more about these characters strategizing and trying to outwit each other, as much as they would love to take a knife and just... They're in a Buddhist monastery, so they have to take a more subtle approach. It doesn't really become a full-fledged action film into the climax, and in that regard, it's a very interesting approach to the wuxia genre. I appreciated the story's direction a lot. The tone is a lot more comical than a lot of King Hu's other work, particularly in the banter present between Wen and Wang. They're both aware of why the other is there, but they don't know that the other person is aware, and so they kind of just pretend to be nice to each other in the most obvious way imaginable. It's pretty subtle comedy, but it's really funny. It's unique for the wuxia genre for its main characters. Most wuxia stories are tales of good versus evil, Dragon Inn being the clearest example of this in this video. But the main characters of this movie are pretty shitty people. They're very selfish, vain, shallow, petty, and even murderous at points. They're utter scumbags, to be honest with you. Not once are they portrayed in a noble or righteous light. But frankly, that's what makes them interesting in my opinion. It's kind of fascinating to get a film in the wuxia genre where the central characters are just petty thieves. It shows that there's more you can do with the wuxia genre than just basic action-adventure stories. In fact, the film can be seen as a message about the futility and vanity of theft and how all it can do is bring harm. There's a scene in which the abbot refers to the sutra as nothing but a tattered piece of paper, and the film makes a point that true value in life should come from meaning rather than material possessions. As you can probably guess from my synopsis, it's another King Hu film where a lot of stuff happens, which keeps the plot constantly engaging. You never really know what's going to happen next, and it heightens the tension. The actual politics of the monastery is a big focus of the film, and honestly, it's pretty interesting. It's very interesting to see how characters try to exploit the presence of Wen and Wang in order to become abbot, but it's also interesting to see how people try to acquire the position legitimately, and I just think it's really interesting to see how the political system of an area so remote and isolated from the rest of the world works, even if it is a fictional depiction. The standout character for me here is Xu Fang as White Fox, Esquire Wen's partner in crime who poses as his concubine. There are a lot of scenes of her sneaking around the monastery with this other guy working with Wen. Those scenes are fun. She also has a real feisty and I don't take shit from anybody attitude, and a real serious demeanor, which I feel adds comedy in a few scenes. Xu Fang also does a lot of great acting with her face in this film, granting White Fox a lot of personality. The climax is essentially a giant chase / martial arts showdown in which the odds could go either way. It's a great exercise in suspense and an absolute delight to watch. It also features some dark humor which surprised me, and the ending is utterly fantastic and incredibly satisfying. If you know, you know. Raining in the Mountain is yet another absolute banger from King Hu, and a film I can easily recommend. It looks amazing, has great tension, features a fair amount of comedic moments and interesting characters, and overall it's just plain fun to watch. And the fact that he made it the same year as Legend of the Mountain is utterly unreal to me. King Hu was clearly someone passionate about film, and you can tell from the films he made that he absolutely loved what he was doing, and the result is some truly exhilarating filmmaking. When I think about his films, I can't help but picture him behind the camera with a massive smile on his face. To be frank, I can only dream of directing a film the way King Hu directed his. He brought such a unique and exciting vision to cinema, a vision that those who know him adore and appreciate, and the fact that not many people seem to know about King Hu is incredibly strange to me, since Dragon Inn was so massive in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and A Touch of Zen apparently influenced an entire generation of passionate filmmakers. So yeah, if you want to see some amazing movies that are somehow both incredibly influential yet virtually unknown outside of Hong Kong, Taiwan, and online film communities, then definitely check out King Hu's body of work. Even if martial arts films aren't your thing, I'd still recommend you at least give them a chance, because in my eyes, they're transcendent. I hope you enjoyed this little video on King Hu and some of his films. Let me know which one of them seems most interesting in the comment section, and definitely check them out if you haven't, because frankly, they're worth it. I also have a Letterboxd page you can check out, link for that is in the description below, and with all that being said, have a great day. Bye!